Hello, everyone. I am Stephanie Lebeck. I am the founder and CEO of the Wounded Workforce, an organization dedicated to building trauma-informed workplaces and focused on supporting mental health in the workplace. I am so excited for our September panel discussion where we're talking about a very important and often discussed topic, burnout. So today we will be joined by five amazing guests to talk about burnout and dive a little bit deeper. But before we do that, I'd love to give our guests a chance to introduce themselves. And I will go ahead and start with Colleen. Colleen, welcome. Great to have you back.
Thank you. Always an honor to be invited to your table, Stephanie. So Colleen Seringer, PhD by background. I do serve as a consultant in the workplace, specifically focused around helping small organizations, especially in the construction industry, on really unpacking and then, of course, addressing the hidden toll of workplace toxicity on mental health. So that is, I've been working in this industry for 25 years. I don't claim myself as a human resource specialist or director or anything. I always want to clarify that. I really am focused on more of that organizational side of the house. So again, always an honor to be at the table. So thank you.
Amazing. Always great to have you and great to see you, Colleen. Velma, welcome. Great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm Velma McCaffrey. I run a company called Work Bigger, and I work as a trauma-informed executive coach. And I specifically help organizations with creating healthy, happy employees. So I'm very excited to be here to talk about burnout because it's a big part of what I do. And I work both with companies and individual clients. And excited to be here to talk more today.
So excited to have you. And if you haven't had a chance to listen yet, Belma and her co-founder of Proactive Conversations were on the Building Trauma-Informed Workplace podcast. They helped me kick off season 3, and it is an absolutely phenomenal conversation. So definitely grateful to have you joining us again for what I'm sure is going to be another great conversation.
Thank you.
Jamie, it's so great to see you again.
Hey, Stephanie, thanks so much for having me today. I can't wait to learn from everybody here. I'm excited to be on this panel. I'm Jamie Conrad. I am the current VP of People and HR at Trust Radius. We're a small B2B SaaS organization in the tech space, helping people make buying decisions on business technology. I've got about 16 years of HR experience, mostly in healthcare until transitioning to tech about 3 years ago, and have been just honored to work with some really great employees and executives through the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, both in healthcare and in the tech.
Amazing. Yes, and I'm certain you're going to have amazing insights into burnout after your experience working in healthcare and in tech in the last few years. So absolutely amazing to have you as always.
Thank you.
Amy, welcome. A Phoenix area local. Finally, another person still sweating out here in the heat.
And even an East Sider, we live just a few miles away from each other. So it's so
I know,
awesome.
I love it. I'm so glad to have you on finally.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Amy Looper, the founder of Resilient Growth, and I spent the first half of my career, first 18 plus years in corporate sales. So just like Jamie, I came from cybersecurity side and also healthcare IT, and went through burnout myself. And through that journey, became a transformational coach and certified in trauma and resiliency. So I just love to help people really find their agency to overcome and navigate challenge and change. So good to be here.
Amazing. So great to have you. And Lisa, we'll have you round us out.
Yes, great to be here, everybody. My name is Lisa Frisha. I'm a fractional chief people officer. I also do talent strategy and leadership development work within my consultancy. I am a former middle school teacher, which I joke is a great preparation for HR, and founding high school principal. And so I bring a lot of that to the work. I recently realized it also informs how I work with organizations because I like the messy middle. So essentially, who I primarily work with is organizations that are either small, growing, or at a pivot of change, and really help leaders to align their business strategy, their culture, and their talent strategy through looking at people and processes so that the change is sustainable.
Amazing. What an amazing group. Thank you all so much for being here. I am beyond thrilled for this conversation we're going to have. And let's talk about the conversation we're going to have. Burnout is a word that gets thrown out a lot. It comes up so frequently in our conversations about life and work, especially during and post COVID-19 pandemic. And I want to start by saying, yes, we're tackling, individual burnout. And I think we'll have some great conversation and tips about how you can prevent your own burnout, how you can help recover from your own burnout. But I also want to make sure we're acknowledging that burnout isn't just an individual issue as well, but we're also going to look at the systemic impacts, the organizational impacts that really contribute to burnout of the employees, the communities at large. I also want to acknowledge that trauma, secondary trauma, compassion fatigue are things we talk about when we talk about trauma-informed workplaces, but we may not be talking about them when we talk about burnout traditionally. Well, those are big culprits when it comes to burnout for ourselves as individuals and for our teams and employees. So I am so thrilled. Obviously, we have a lot of ground to cover, but very excited to have, a conversation about burnout that might be a little common, but I promise you, you will not have the same answers, the same information that you're used to getting, especially knowing this group we've got assembled here today. So with that, I would love to start the conversation asking each of you to share why the topic of addressing burnout is important to you personally, professionally, or both.
I'm happy to go kick us off. So mine is definitely professionally and personally. So from a professional standpoint, I mean, when we think about mental health, I mean, that's just the umbrella, right? And so burnout is definitely one of the components that falls underneath that umbrella. So from a professional standpoint, in the organizations that I serve, it's a must, right? And then from a personal standpoint, I would say, so I left corporate in 2023, and it was a lot of time leading up to me leading up to making that decision. But one of the things that I actually realized is we talk about burnout from workload. My burnout was the reverse. I was not challenged any longer. And felt like I was pushing a boulder uphill trying to make it work for me, when in reality, I felt like my brain cells were dying. And so my burnout was the opposite. I was so exhausted from not learning, from not being challenged, and from trying to make it work for me. But it took me a minute to realize that. So that's my why in regards to the topic.
I can share next. Thank you, Colleen, for speaking to that. That is so fascinating. It's true, right? We often hear about workload and how it's so intense, but we don't hear as much about the opposite, about how we really need to be challenged in the workplace to feel energized. So I mean, personally, I've also been through burnout. I feel like all of us here probably have. So that's how I started my work in this space and supporting clients with it, because I knew the impact of burnout and how it just depletes you and affects your potential and how you show up, not just at work, but for me, it impacted how I show up with my family and my friends. And, I first experienced it when I was a new mom and I was trying to navigate motherhood and the workplace. So I just became really adamant about figuring that part out. And as I started coaching and working with clients one-on-one, I saw that, part of my mission was helping people reach their full potential. You can't really do that unless you're addressing emotional and mental health and going deeper than just the strategies and the skill building and all of that. So I think professionally, looking at burnout is so important because it impacts everything that we do, you know. And I also like, I don't think we're like a work person and a home person, you know. It's like we're a full person. So I think it's really important to see how it's impacting like the full picture. So that's my why.
So I do think that there's a work person and a home person, unfortunately, and that's why this conversation is so important. Is because I think that in order for us to get where we want to go with, you know, future of work and how we interact with each other, it's going to be important for us to understand that this is a whole human being. It doesn't matter where they're at. So I love that that's part of your mission and your why. I'm here primarily because, of course, you know, I witnessed a lot in healthcare and have had a wild ride in VC-backed tech for the last couple of years. But closer to me is the communities of HR professionals that I've become involved in over the last couple of years, and just hearing about consistently the level of burnout and the workload and the stress and the capacity constraints, and watching several of my HR colleagues make the decision to I don't want to be in-house HR any longer because I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of the burnout. I don't feel the passion anymore. And so it's become a self-care topic for me when I think about as we continue to move our profession forward and helping our workplaces thrive, we have to start with ourselves. And it's really meaningful to have the opportunity to have a place to speak about that. Because we don't talk about it a lot, and it needs to be a topic of conversation.
And I'm here to really hold the light for anyone that's going through burnout. You know, Belma, you had mentioned going through burnout, you know, when you going through a big life transition, like becoming a parent, been there as well. Been there going through, you know, burnout in toxic relationships. So sometimes people, you know, they present symptoms of burnout, but burnout is not a mindset issue. And there's so many misconceptions about it. It can manifest in so many ways, from chronic illnesses and hormonal imbalances, you know, CPTSD. I lived with that for many years after I figured out where my chronic source of stress is coming from. You know, and so people are dealing with these things even when they're high performers. And usually high performers are amazing at masking all of it until they just can't. And so I'm here for all of you that may be listening and saying, I just need someone to understand me. That's exactly why I'm here.
Amy, I felt personally targeted by your last sentence, so thank you. So I agreed with everyone. I approach it a little bit differently. So I predominantly work with mission-driven organizations where it is a little bit more difficult to separate your personal identity from work in a lot of ways. And so that group of people is just more susceptible to burnout. As a principal and then chief people officer, I can't make the work easier, right? The work is the work. But what I can do is make sure that you have the support that you need, that we're not adding unnecessary friction that's going to drive you crazy, that you feel like you have a support system and that you can see and feel the impact of your work. And so I've always tried to approach this from a systemic level rather than just on a one-on-one, so that I think, you know, it's a rising tide lifts all ships. And I think good systems and good processes with good education and training actually supports people and then reduces their burnout, but also have a very personal connection, because I was seriously burnt out after helping to grow an organization and, you know, COVID in 5 states, running HR, you know, it was definitely not easy. And at one point was just not the best version of myself. And so needed to take that step back to sort of recover. So, and that's why I'm here.
Amazing. I love it right out of the gate on the first question when you guys proved me right about this being an amazing conversation. So thank you so much. And I have to say, like, every time, Jamie, you talk about watching other HR professionals burn out, watching so many people leave the industry. I mean, I was one of those people. And I love your commitment to talking about it and making the change from the seat of a HR executive, because I think it is so powerful for the future, not only of the profession, but of the workplace. So just again, kudos to you. I always love it so much when you bring this perspective. I'm like, oh, every time I say it, I'm like, oh, I love JB so much because it's so important. So now, kind of popcorn style, anyone who feels called to, jump in and answer these questions or drive the conversation. One of the questions I have is kind of an interesting one, because I don't think there's this, perfect answer to this, but from what you've seen, from what you've experienced, what do you think the primary causes are of burnout in today's workplaces? And do you think there's a real significant difference, between industries, between professions?
I think oftentimes burnout can be from death by a thousand cuts, of chronic stress. And those stress sources might be workload, right? We see that organizations are shrinking oftentimes, yet the expectation is still very high, if not doubled. And so that workload is a real issue. But also the way in which we communicate, if there's a toxic workplace where there's, for an example, gaslighting, or people are working in those kind of environments where, things are just reality is not being honored and respectful communication is not being honored, that really takes a toll on a person over a long period of time. So burnout is just like a manifestation of a lot of different things, in addition to whatever they're dealing with personally.
Yeah, I agree. Something I've seen too is a lack of confidence and self-worth can contribute to burnout. What I've seen with clients is sometimes when they're experiencing the lack of self-worth, they're focused on doing and overcompensating for that. And it's really challenging. And they usually don't have the education, right, or the knowledge or the support to understand where it's coming from. And the focus is on like, yeah, maybe it is working less, right? And but usually that may not necessarily address the deeper problem that they're experiencing.
I think in the workplace, one of the challenges, and I think this is an American issue in a lot of ways, is that we focus a lot on the individual and not on the system. And even when we talk about managers, right, I think it's like, let's develop the managers, let's develop their EI, which is all definitely important, don't get me wrong, but are we also developing people to get clear decision-making rights and clarity of outcomes? And how is that organizationally supported and encouraged as well? I think there's workload, don't get me wrong, but some of my happiest times were working really, really hard. The issue is, do I know what I'm working towards? Do I feel success? Do I feel supported? And I think systems aren't sexy. And I think it's a lot of work and hard work. And it's a lot easier to, give a free yoga class. And I think until we start to embrace that systems are sexy, I think that, and treat burnout as an individual problem, I think you're just going to continue to see it in the workplace.
Yeah. And I love that, Lisa. I think, I'm with you. Like we've got to start to focus on the systems. And so when I think about that, I think about like all the things that Amy said, Belma, what you have added in regards to the individual, the system and the individual come together, right? But if we are not set from a system standpoint, setting things up from the beginning in regards to how have I interviewed, how have I onboarded, how have I all these things, then that's where they come kind of crashing together, right, from that individual and system standpoint. And so there is so much work to be done there. And Lisa, you said it perfectly. A yoga class is not going to take away burnout. Like I would love to see never a yoga class come into a workplace ever again. It's not going to solve for it. We've got to realize that those two things come together. And then the other thing then I was thinking about adding is being seen, heard, and respected. That too, to me, is a system. It's an individual, but it's also a system responsibility. And so I think that too can lead to burnout.
So you guys are talking about systems. So I want to talk about the systems because I think systems are sexy. I love a system. I think it is the scaffold. It's the structure that holds together our culture or the desired culture we have, but we don't think about them so often. Lisa and I are like going to get together offline and just talk about systems. I already know it. But how can you approach changing the systems within a workplace? Which, I mean, let's be real, that sounds hard. That sounds like a big undertaking. What could we do, either big picture or even just small scale, to start to create a less burnout prone organization?
I'll take that one. I think having a really good understanding of what that employee experience looks like is a good place to start. Sometimes there's blind spots in management or in leadership when we're making strategic decisions on how that actually plays out and affects the employee experience throughout the organization. And so spending some time really understanding what are the things that are happening in the workplace, how do our operations make employee feel on a regular basis, and how is that impacting their workload? And one strategic decision could result in 25 manual tasks that, oh, we didn't mean for you to have to do 25 manual tasks, but that's the reality of that decision. And so just having a really good understanding of what some of those things are, but that also means having a priority on employee experience, and being organizations being willing to make the investments needed for that employee experience to help with what those systems look like, how it feels, how it's operationalized, and have a focus on the human side of all of that combined. Does this lead to additional work, or does this actually help to alleviate burnout? Does it, what are the ramifications truly?
Jamie, I love that you're starting with like who are we centering in this conversation, and what is the data telling us, right? Because too often I think senior leaders, and sometimes out of the goodness of their heart, right, are just like, oh, I see this, like I'm going to solve this, without actually talking to folks about what the actual pain points are, and involving them that, right? I mean, the person who does procurement probably knows how to fix procurement better than anybody else. So like, let's get their insight. So using data and really being thoughtful about the types of surveys that we send to folks, I think is important as well. Yeah, I definitely would start there. There was something else, but it'll come to me later.
The other thing I would add, so I am very big on boots on the ground employee feedback. I know this is obviously size dependent, but I don't, until you are rolling up your sleeves, working side by side with that employee in some fashion, you will not know if you created 25 new processes by trying to solve, right? And so I think that Lisa, you said it perfectly. I jotted this down when you were giving your intro. The work is the work. And I think about that when I think about construction. When you're working on a roof in the summer in Atlanta, Georgia, that's where I am. It's hot. You cannot change the fact that it's 130 degrees on the roof, right? The work is the work, but the work has to get done. And so I do think, like, when I think about that boss, that owner, that whoever, being boots on the ground with the people, saying, I'm sweating next to you, not just showing up and doing the spot check. Those things are really important at some point throughout the time frame that you're with your people. They want to see you doing it too. And again, I know that creates maybe some additional time, and it seems like, oh, that's just unrealistic, but it's really important. Sometimes people want to see the boss doing the grunt work. And I think that is extremely important when we're collecting that feedback.
And Colleen, we forget because we get more distant from the experience. And so, I remember as a principal having to step into the classroom and just forgetting how much, like, lesson planning was great, grading, all that stuff was fine. The copy machine was going to drive me over the edge, right? Like, that was the thing that was going to do me in. And I had forgotten about that. And so I think routinely going through your processes, whether it's I'm going to apply for a job on my website, or like whatever those things are. I think we just get disconnected from it. I think that's natural, but I think it's not just helpful for them, it's helpful for us too.
Perfect. I think so insightful. And I love that we're looking at the system and, how we can make changes on that front, because if we're only ever, like picking on individuals on how we change and prevent and recover from burnout, we're only really telling half the story. So love that input you all had. So to shift to the individual a little bit, I want to think about, for managers, for leaders, what are some recommendations, some strategies that you would recommend to help prevent burnout on their teams and maybe even for themselves, especially, for example, in those high stress environments? I love that we're talking the work is the work. We still have to do it, but how can we deploy some strategies to help effectively mitigate burnout as a leader for ourselves and for our teams?
I think it starts with leaders, right? Leaders have to have a sense of safety. They have to feel like they are in a place of trust and psychological safety within the workplace. And so they've got to do that, between themselves and the higher leaders. But then also, as they manage their team, they have to lead with congruency and integrity in that. And that might look like, hey, let's make sure that we just really minimize meetings to what is absolutely required. Or let's make sure we have a one-on-one so that we have and really show up to the one-on-ones, because we all know we want to do the one-on-ones, but they don't always happen, and really make those a really healthy place. And it has to go beyond, I do corporate speaking all the time. And the thing that I really dislike about it is that oftentimes it's used as a check mark. There's no follow through. And I absolutely hate that, because we're here to create change. And if we're going to build resiliency beyond things like burnout, we have to develop those core competencies. And so that's what leaders need to be doing with their team.
I love that, Amy. It is used as a check mark, right? And there is no follow through. I think that's part of the problem. What I've seen has been really helpful is a couple of things. One, education, like really learning, things that we don't learn in school unless we major in these things, but learning about like what happens to us when we are in a place of stress and how we shift into fight or flight, and then how that impacts our decisions and how that ultimately also impacts the business, right? Since this is a workplace, I think having that understanding, what I've seen is that when people understand, like, okay, this is happening to me, it's an automatic reaction in my brain, I'm now in fight or flight, I can't show up as my best. There's like shame is lessened. And I think that's really helpful, because people will layer on like, I'm burned out and no, now there's something wrong with me. So I think the education piece is really important. And then kind of tying it to the systems a little bit, like creating, like spreading that education within the team and the organization, and then creating some group norms and agreements as a team that you're going to stay accountable to. I think that's where the follow through can be really difficult. Accountability is really challenging. So, but if we were to start small, with the individual, then spread to the team, and then operationalize those norms that we agree to, I think it can make a difference. At least that's what I've seen with some of my clients.
Yeah, and having those mid-level managers just feel really empowered with how to see it, how to spot it, what to look for, how to have conversations, facilitating conversations around it's okay to say no, like having that be part of the language in the workplace. Here's how to say no respectfully. Here's, the questions that we're going to ask if we're given an assignment, or if we're asked to do something that's outside of our job description. Here's the questions we're going to ask around that to help us prioritize where that work goes. And we've gone through, unfortunately, some layoffs at Trust Radius, and battling capacity issues along the way. I love that our executive team leaned into the idea of having a company-wide initiative where we are documenting actively what we're not going to do as a result, so that we can have it publicly visible that these things are important. We want to have them on a parking lot type of area, but we're not going to, don't feel pressured to work on these things right now. And I think that has made a big impact in the organization. And we're working through what that looks like as we speak. But I'm getting such good feedback from employees on that, on how that's making them feel and think about things differently. Because our executive team doesn't want, we were fortunate to be able to keep these employees, and we don't want them to leave as a result of some of the challenges that we're experiencing as a business. And so they're listening, they're taking action, and it's meaningful action to the employees that are being affected by it.
Yeah. Thelma and Jamie, I love that you are discussing that as a leadership team and organizationally, it has to be a, we are doing this. I would say in addition to that, and Amy, I think this couples the leadership training and talks that you do is, and again, it seems really silly and, but managers don't always know the right questions or have the right processes on how to work with folks. Like, what are the good checking questions that are going to get me the information I want? And newsflash, it's not going to be, how are you doing? And do you need anything? Right? It might be like, what's the thing that's driving you crazy? And we emulate the manager. We emulate in a lot of ways, either the managers that we've had, or we try to actively avoid something that they've done, but we don't have a lot of positive models about what does it look like to create psychological safety, and also have people understand that means we're going to push each other too. And like creating sample agendas so that there is a floor, that there is at least a minimum, there's a minimum employee experience that we know they're having while managers are doing that deep EI work that's just going to take some time. I think we've got to approach it as a both and.
And then the last thing that I'd like to add with it goes with the safety piece, the psychological safety piece. I think that when I think about burnout and workload specifically, I don't believe that we are setting employees up well enough to be able to take that day off, take that vacation, go on maternity leave, paternity leave, whatever the case may be, and feel that everything's going to, and not feel as though everything's going to fall apart when they walk away, right? So I think where the responsibility falls is then goes back to the system and the psychological safety piece. We have to make sure in some fashion that our employees don't feel threatened by like, I have to hold this information, so I'm the only one that can do this job. I don't want to give it all up because that person may want to take my job from me. So that's that whole toxic piece, right? So we've got to me, it's a huge opportunity that you should be able to step away and not have to check your email, not feel like you shouldn't have to be locked out because legally you have to because you're on leave for some reason. You should be able to do that on a regular day off. But I think that plays into those toxic practices. And again, that need for that, like that's how we can elevate and make people feel safe, that it is not about someone taking your job because they now know more than you. It is so that you can do X, Y, and Z and have that time that you need to step away. So that's just where my mind went for like a last thing to add to some of the systems and the safety aspects.
I love that. Such great points, such great insights. So I want to talk a little bit about, obviously I spend a lot of time talking about the impacts of trauma in the workplace, some of the signs, some of the symptoms of trauma. And a couple of things I've been talking about a lot lately are the concepts of secondary trauma and compassion fatigue. And to very quickly define these so we're all on the same page, secondary trauma is when you are witnessing. So you're either seeing, hearing about, viewing on social media the traumatic experiences of others. And in you, it creates a similar psychological response to you directly experiencing that trauma. Compassion fatigue is similar but different. I like to call it empathetic burnout, is a way to think about it in an easy way for all of us. But compassion fatigue is, again, you are constantly subjected to witnessing, to hearing about, to viewing on social media these traumatic events, these horrible instances, and it takes a toll. And I'll never forget, Catherine Manning joined one of these panels where we talked about compassion fatigue and secondary trauma. And she told a story about someone telling her that they didn't feel anything. They no longer felt because of their compassion fatigue. And so much of the signs, the symptoms of trauma, secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, they overlap with burnout. Certainly, we're not here to diagnose or treat anyone, but I would love to talk about, as we, navigate some of these psychological injuries, which burnout is one. What are some of the signs and symptoms we can look for in ourselves and those around us that go, hey, maybe this person is at risk, so we can do some more heavy lifting when it comes to prevention, or we can provide some intervention and resources to them as well.
So the way that I would respond to this, and this goes back to some of the things we talked about in the beginning in regards to putting yourself in the throes of the day-to-day with your employees, I think it's easier to miss some of those signs and symptoms if you do not know who your employees are because you haven't been into the day-to-day with them, right? And just to elaborate on that a little bit, it's like if you are in the throes and an employee typically responds with immediately, my weekend was great, things are going well, but this Monday or Tuesday or whatever, they have a pause that is just 1 to 2 minutes too long, you will be able to recognize that because you know your people. And so I just feel like that's a really important thing to wrap back around that, because it's easy to miss those things, like that person paused for 2 seconds too long on that response, or I'm noticing they're starting to really kind of go inward and they don't want to be engaged. They don't want to come to the meeting. They're declining. They're doing these things that when we are suffering from burnout, depression, anxiety, whatever, many people tend to go inward. They remove themselves, right, from situations. So I think those to me are they're just really critical, easy things to miss if you don't know who your people are. And so I think, yeah, it's that change in behavior, which feels like such a standard thing to say, but it really is a change in someone's behavior.
Going back to the analogy of the death of 1,000 paper cuts that was provided earlier, you get your first paper cut and you're like, oh, darn, that hurts. I'm going to put a Band-Aid on it. I'm fine. I'm going to keep going. You get your 100 millionth paper cut and you're like, oh my God, if I get one more paper cut, I just can't handle this anymore. I don't want to think about it. What if I bleed to death? And the irritability level and the extreme thought just goes all the way to the other end of the pendulum. And so, it absolutely is that behavior shift. It's the irritability happens quicker. The amount of complaints increases, the work decreases, you see them showing up less. And that's going back to that manager enablement. That's this training that they need to hear. Those are the things that if you have the opportunity to work with your managers on, talk to them about those things, encourage them to work next to and really understand their people so that they know those signs to look for and then how to navigate through those situations. But one more paper cut shouldn't be the end of the world. And if that's where you're at, or that's where that person is at, then there's probably something bigger going on there. And there's a bigger conversation that could be had around that.
And Jamie, you're making me realize also that, our managers have to take care of themselves so that they're able to take in that information as well. And if they're not, they can definitely miss something. But I'd also offer a slightly different way of thinking about it, which is that, and Amy, it makes me, your point earlier during your introduction definitely resonated, which is that some people can mask this. And so not just assuming, but just whether it's quarterly that you are systemically just checking in on your team with a few questions. Because sometimes that's when it'll come out. And that, to your point, Colleen, that's when you'll start to see the pause or the, what have you. So I think you've also got to, and I think this is probably hardest for good people managers, right? Because they're like, I have great relationships with my people, and it can be easy to miss those. So that both and of having dedicated time to do that.
I think anxiety is the common thread. You'll see people or they either go high, right? They either go fight or flight, or they retract. And so you just knowing, are they going full bore? Are they, anxious in conversations? Are they trying to just like bulldoze their way through? That will be a sign of, ooh, we got to lighten the fire a little bit and kind of regulate. And then if they go low, if they're retreating, they're not answering your calls. Let's say you have a remote workforce. You're not seeing them turn things in, or maybe they're really slow to make decisions if they have a position where they're able to do that. So it's just really understanding, like, where's that zone of regulation, and are we going high or are we going low? That's a really easy visual you can kind of keep in your head when you're managing your team.
Amazing. What great responses. I so appreciate the insights there. We've talked a lot about burnout prevention, and rightly so. We all know that it's much easier to prevent burnout than to treat burnout. But let's be honest, burnout happens. I know I've experienced burnout. There are probably people listening to us right now who are experiencing burnout, and I don't want to miss out on an opportunity to speak directly to them. So, if someone is listening who is experiencing burnout, what is your advice on a path towards recovery?
I think starting, and this is not what people normally will tell you, but those of us who are really trauma informed, and we've done the salutogenic work of care, which means we understand you have to regulate your body first before any kind of work like therapy, cognitive, CBT, or any kind of thing like that will actually take hold. You have to get your nervous system in a place of regulation. So the easiest thing you can do today is work on just connecting your mind and your body through your breath. I'm going to lead a workshop tonight on that same thing with leaders, where we're just literally doing box breathing, literally just breathing in slowly, using breathing from your diaphragm. It sounds so easy, and it is, but the not so easy part is to do that consistently. So if you are in that place of burnout, yes, use resources, get help, do that, and also help yourself through the one tool that everybody has, and that is your breath.
I love that so much, Amy. I was going to say, give yourself the space to process the burnout. Don't try to bypass it. And that means really, doing these exercises. I love the breath example because it's so simple, but people are resistant, right? To sitting with themselves. And I'll throw out another tool too, which helped me personally very much, is just journaling on my thoughts and labeling my feelings. Just grab a feelings list and see if you can label that. That's just a way to start regulating yourself. And it's something you can do for 5 minutes before you go to bed.
And then I'll add, I'm a big believer in, this word is always used very negatively, but I believe that there's an opportunity for us to change it to a positive. Be selfish. Selfish is a boundary in disguise. Say no. Say no. Just say no. That's the other thing I would add. Boundaries.
Love heals the wounds. So lean into those people that love you, whether that's community, whether that's family, friends that you've had that know who you are. Remind yourself who you are and why you are. And I think that can help to take away some of the edge and allow for healing to begin.
I would also add, and this may not be possible in every role, but just connecting to the things that bring you joy within your work. I could definitely remember my last year as a principal being super burnt out. And sometimes I would just cover a class, not because it was necessary, but it was just like, I just need to be with kids right now. And that's what I need. And I always, when I do leader coaching and leadership development, I say the first thing to do is to create an inbox in your email for nice things and save those emails anytime someone says this is, this was great or what have you. And the days that you're like, I can't do this anymore, just having those letters from people that you've impacted, the work that you've done, can definitely help as well.
I have to just do a quick sidebar. Lisa, I love that you would go into a classroom. I think that is so cool. Like, how cool is that? What a great way.
I mean, that's another, just Colleen, to your part, as a leader, you have to be able to say, like, I know how to do the job I'm telling you to do. So teaching was great. And then it also normalizes to like, oh, this is just a hard part of the job. Like, it's not like, maybe gets a little bit easier as you do it, or the amount that's hard narrows down. But for all of the flaws that I had as a leader, people knew I could teach. So.
But I think again, like you just hit something so well, like at any, like no matter where we are in our level, there's always a job that is different or that we can connect back to, and maybe it is just doing copies. And I hate to use the word just, because making copies is really important at some jobs, right?
So we did that actually as a network, because obviously educators, Jamie, education and healthcare were like cousins during COVID, but our teachers were really burnt out. And so our network staff signed up for slots where we literally just went in and I'll fix the bulletin boards. I'll do this. And it's, I think it's really important for them to see the CEO and the chief people officer doing these very like concrete tasks, going around saying like, how can I help you? It was definitely at the very least a morale booster, even if teachers were like, I can do my own copies, but it was like, but it's nice that you offered.
Yeah, I love that.
I think there's like something that's been underlying a lot of what we've been talking about that I just want to call out so everyone catches it. But there's really this strong message to leaders, to organizations, that showing and recognizing the value of the contributions of your workforce, showing them how important everything they do is, whether it's by getting in the weeds and doing the work with them, whether it's by appreciation, whether it's by saying, how can I make your job easier? I think when we think with that lens, that can just be a great way to just have this powerful tool. Like, how can I signal respect? How can I signal recognition? How can I signal care to my team with my deliberate actions? Like, I'm hearing every one of you say that, and I'm like, I want to make sure that that's a real deliberate takeaway for our listeners today. So that I just had to sum that up. And I can't believe we're almost out of time already. I think we could talk for hours about this, but want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I would love to wrap up if each of you would share if you have any recommendations on a book, article, podcast, any other media you would recommend for folks who want to learn more or take action to help prevent or recover from burnout. And I'll start with you, Lisa.
So I'm going to come sideways at it. I'm currently reading Friction. I can't find the book right now, so I don't know the authors. But the book is called Friction, and it's literally about how do you make the right things easier for your organization. Sometimes you need a little friction, but how do you systemically approach it? What are ways that you can bring people together to do that process improvement? I think, given the systems talk that I gave, I'm really fascinated by that book.
Amazing. Great. I haven't heard of that one yet, too. So I'm very excited to add that to the list. Amazing. Thank you. Amy.
So, well, I have a free training coming out actually next week called Breadwinner Burnout, and it's all about this. So how to do that, right? Really how to recondition the way that we have been conditioned as women. But I also want to call out this book, Patriarchy Stress Disorder by Dr. Valerie Rain. This one was pivotal in my journey, and also when I developed my own programs. and really seeing how society, our own expectations, and just how it's like filtered down the generations, and how we put out these little subconscious prison guards that keep us back. And so in an effort, because my life mission is to help women especially overcome fear and anxiety, just thinking of our little barriers of comfortable zones that we put ourselves in. And when we stretch into courage and those things that really help us jump out and create new experiences and transform our lives, this book was really pivotal. So that one was highly recommended.
Amazing. Thank you. Jamie.
I would recommend Emily Nagoski. They did a TEDx talk on why we need to talk about burnout, and they also co-authored Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. It's a book about the science behind burnout and offers some actionable strategies that can be really impactful, especially valuable for women in high pressure environments. I'm a huge Brené Brown fan, so I can't not say Brené. And then would also suggest this conversation reminded me of a book, The Joy of Work. And it's about falling in love with your job again. And so when we talk about finding your why and leaning into the thing that made you happy with your job to begin with, they offer some scientific research and personal experiences about how to create that happier, less stressful workplace and fall in love with your job all over again.
Amazing. Fantastic recommendations. Thank you so much. Velma.
I would recommend a book by Rick Hansen. He's a neuroscientist, and it's called Hardwiring Happiness. And it's one of my favorites. It's basically all about training your brain to emphasize the good, right? It's not about not processing the bad stuff or being with the bad stuff, but just creating like a positivity bias in your brain, and that helps to build more resilience. So I absolutely love it and highly recommend.
Amazing. Thank you. And Colleen, wrap us up.
Stephanie, you already know what I'm going to say.
I do. I know what you're going to say, but I'm going to let you say it anyway.
So I do not come with a book recommendation, but because of the systems, right? I am all about the Adam Grant Work-Life podcast. He covers it all. And that's usually what I start my Saturday morning runs with, was whatever he talked about for that week. So highly recommend. They're short episodes, but they really just kind of get to the meat to it quickly, which I love. So that's my recommendation.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. This was such a phenomenal conversation. I know I took away recommendations. I took away things to think about, and my husband will hate it, but I also took away several books that I need to add to my bookshelf. Thank you all for joining us and for listening in. And I hope to see you next month in October, where we'll be talking about trauma-informed benefits. Until next time, be well.